Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Hardwood Knocks. This is Adam Frommel here with my always fantastic co-host, Dan Favalli. We've got 4 teams left in the NBA playoffs, and naturally, everyone is talking about those 4 teams, so naturally, we're not going to. Instead, we're going to give some attention to the Western Conference lottery teams. We're running through the 7 squads that did not have a chance to play any postseason basketball and trying to come up with the single biggest offseason question. It can be anything at all. With these exercises, we do typically try to stay away from the classic, who should they draft with pick X questions, because those are just a little bit too much low-hanging fruit. I also did not run that by Dan, so I'm hoping that he actually stayed away from those as we usually do, but we'll find out live. Before we get to any of those questions, though, I have the single most important one of the episode, and that's how's it going, Dan?
I am doing well. Thanks for asking. I did, in fact, ignore sort of who are they going to draft at X spot. Also only fair because we recorded the Eastern Conference part of this before the draft lottery. And since we just couldn't record the West until after the lottery, it's only right that we continue by that. So we're not ignoring the super obvious, but the whole, who is OKC going to draft at number 2 is not going to be at play here. How are you doing?
I am good. Always a ton of stuff going on, but enjoying watching playoff basketball. And it's just a fun time of year to be a sports fan in general, just with so many big events happening in so many different sports.
And the NBA playoffs have certainly been a trip of content, especially if you're a Patrick Beverley fan, which I am not.
Yeah, that was something. I don't know what that something is, but
something we don't need to focus on, I would think. So
that's
we
fair.
Cannonball into this lottery team exercise.
That is fair. Yeah, we're going to go alphabetically. So we'll start with the Houston Rockets. I feel like you can ask a ton of questions about this team just because it's a roster that's in so much flux. I wanted to focus on whether they're willing to extend Kevin Porter Jr. and or Jae'Sean Tate. Porter's able to receive up to $184 million in an extension. Tate would be around $60 million. Obviously, those are big numbers, and they're not going to get the full scope of those extensions. But if they do come to terms, how much would it be for? And are they even going to come to terms? Because beyond Jalen Green, I don't know who Houston views as a true building block for whatever the next competitive iteration is, which is why I'm focusing on these 2 guys, because they're candidates, even if Porter is coming off a pretty disappointing season. And even if Tate is ultimately limited to more of like a higher end role player ceiling, do they view these guys as long-term pieces for the organization?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And the extensions specifically are tough, because what do you want to give Kevin Porter Jr. knowing that he's not, we've seen it, but him at point guard is not the answer. He's probably best off as sort of a microwave player off the bench. I think Jae'Sean Tate has a ton of value for his defense, and we know that these wing types, even if they're not the best shooters or the best offensive players, they're going to get some money in free agency. And so I could see numbers or the justification behind drawing a line in the sand and saying, if they're willing to sign for X, we'll keep them. But you're also so early into your rebuild that you don't want to lock yourself into any deals that are too steep. And I would be curious as to who they value more moving forward between those 2. And I agree with what you said about Jalen Green kind of being the only tentpole prospect. Alperen Sengun probably comes closest, but does that change with, we said we weren't going to reference the draft, but they're in a spot to take one of the 3 bigs that are viewed as the consensus top prospects in these drafts. How does that change Alperen Sengun's value to this team, his future trajectory with this team? Still, those 2 players, and you have the unknown in Usman Garuba. There's long-term foundation pieces here, but I don't think that Tate or Porter Jr. is necessarily one of them. I think this is more so a matter of, if you can get them cheap enough and they can help us, or these are deals that they can be moved later and they're actually more helpful at a more expensive number than these sub $2 million salaries they're working on right now, or sub $4 million in KPJ's case, that could be a value play for them.
I have to admit that I totally misfired on KPJ. I thought that going into this season, I thought he was just going to explode, actually be the answer to that point guard question. Couldn't have been more wrong. It didn't work. And then some.
And that's not supposed to be his game either. And I think it's, he might be more useful to them knowing what we saw from Jalen Green over the second half of the season. I don't think Jalen Green's a primary initiator type, but maybe he can be your 1B. And so now you just have to focus on finding more of a floor general to go with him. And you can still have room for someone like KPJ. I don't know what the number is that you'd feel like if he wants, mid-level money in his extension, or you're giving it to him $11-12 million a year.
Yeah, I think you would.
I probably would. Jayshawn Tate, who do you view as more valuable to them, though, between those two?
I think KPJ ultimately is because of the ceiling, where I think that's a few levels higher. Tate, while a good role player who can fill a bunch of different roles, provides energy, provides enthusiasm and intensity, like that's the easier role to go out and find on the cheap. It's harder to find a cheap version of what Porter does in theory. But I think you're still at a stage of this rebuilding process where you can feasibly chase that upside, knowing that it could backfire.
I just wonder if not having a building block wing on the team, maybe aside from Tate, Garuba's not a wing. Garrison Matthews isn't really a wing. I just don't like, you have Jalen Green. I'm just wondering if that factors into it at all. And knowing even if you have KPJ, you're going to have to go out and find someone else who can be a primary ball handler anyway, if that sort of diminishes his long-term utility to this squad.
It definitely could. And really either of these players could go either way. It's a good question. I think I don't have an answer because Houston could very feasibly go in any direction with these players.
If I had to guess, I would say Tate's more likely to get an extension than KPJ. I don't think either.
Just because of the numbers, right?
Right. And I don't think that either of them get extensions personally, but who am I to say anything? My question for them is, are they going to move Gordon and or Wood this offseason? And then you can fold John Wall into that. I still think $47.3 million salary, that's going to end in a buyout unless the Lakers decide they want to give up a pick with Russ for John Wall, which makes zero sense for them, in my opinion. I think I'd be curious to see who has more value around the league. It's probably Wood just because he's younger and he's more of an anomaly at his position offensively. But Eric Gordon was really good this year, man. And just the rim pressure he puts on, the shooting, someone who can hold up defensively. Yes, he's getting older. Yes, he's had his injury issues. Yes, he has that non-guaranteed $20.9 million salary for 23-24. You happily pay that salary if he makes an all-star team or you win a championship. So I get it why Wood, though, would be more appealing, especially where they are, though, in the draft order now. I'm not a big fan of drafting for fit this early in the process or building your team necessarily for fit. But when you have Şengün and it's really time to uncork Garuba and you're about to get one of those three bigs, and you know that Christian Wood's going to command, he's extension eligible too. He's going to command a ton of money, or at least more money than he's making right now, probably if he gets to free agency, and that you really shouldn't be bankrolling that next deal. He feels like the guy that should absolutely be moved because it's less egregious if you just if you house Eric Gordon for the rest of the season and kind of just let him come off your books. I think might technically be the more useful player in a lot of circumstances, but it feels like you can get more compensation for Christian Wood. And so you might as well just go out and get that compensation whilst you can.
Totally agree, but I feel like we're going to see both players moved. And I say that knowing full well that I was downright shocked that Eric Gordon wasn't moved at this past trade deadline. He seemed like maybe the most obvious player to be on the move just because of what he brings to the table as a guy who can put pressure on the rim, a guy who can, feasibly launch away from a foot or two beyond the 3-point arc, a guy who played pretty pesky on-ball defense. And he was ready to go to work for a contender, it seemed. And for him to stay in Houston was pretty shocking. For the same reasons, I don't expect him to remain. Plus, Jalen Green's second half breakout. The ball's going to be in his hands even more. If they do keep KPJ, they're going to want the ball in his hands too. So it feels like there's an even smaller role in store for Gordon if he stays. So I would think they're going to get something for him, knowing that, if he's on the roster, sure, he might speed along the development of some of these younger guys, but he's not going to be contributing to a playoff team.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. I don't know how much, do you want a strong veteran presence in the locker room? Again, it seemed like Eric Gordon wanted to suit up for a contender too. And so he actually just might be the more likely to get moved by virtue of his age and how counter to the quote unquote timeline, how much he runs counter to that. for Houston. And also, look, they have Josh Christopher, gave him some nice minutes too. And who knows what they could end up. Look, if they bring Dennis Schroeder back, or if they wind up with, getting someone else out of the draft or an undrafted free agent that they signed, or they want to give more reps to, they might just decide to go the all-in youth route, or organically just having other options. So you kind of talked me into Eric Gordon being more likely to get moved. I think both of them should be, because Christian was not someone you look to as like the steadying veteran leadership presence anyway. So I think you should be fine to get rid of him, especially when, I don't know, I think bigs of his caliber might be a little bit more in demand than we think, because of the way we've seen playoff teams play, where it's not necessarily downsizing, but you have bigs who can play a smalls game on offense and defense. Christian Wood cannot do the latter, but he can certainly do the former. And so a team like Charlotte, would they be willing to give up real value to get him, even though he doesn't stabilize their defense? Maybe the fact that I can't like just rattle off a bunch of different suitors for him off the top of my head speaks to that his value might be lower than we actually think. But given how anomalous, to use the word again, his offensive skill set is at his position, if you're going to use him at the 5, it just feels like there will be a team where you're going to get more than just a first round pick for him.
Yeah. If you had to bet, which of them or both or none gets traded?
I'm just going to say both.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too.
There's going to be enough top end talent in Houston now too, when you look at this year's pick, Jalen Green, to say, okay, like we can just turn the keys over, sort of what OKC did. And like our veteran presences are going to be a Derek Favors or a Mike Muscala, like a much cheaper person than an Eric Gordon or Christian Wood, especially because it's going to be a veteran who doesn't have the leverage to want out. I think Eric Gordon's good enough to want out. In true Hardwood Knocks fashion, though, we have already gone 2 minutes over our time limit on this team. So do you want to take us to the next one?
Next up, we have the Los Angeles Clippers. My question for them is kind of simple. Can you run back a team that went 42-40 but couldn't make it through the play-in tournament? The obvious confounding variable there is health, because had Paul George been fully healthy all year, had Kawhi Leonard been available at all, they're probably not finding themselves in that situation. Those health concerns aren't going away. This is ultimately an older roster that is only going to keep getting older and doesn't really have that potential breakout young guy, nor does it have any cap space to go out and get anyone of significance. If you're looking to run it back, you're probably going to have to give Nick Batum a new contract. He has a $3.3 million player option that he's likely going to turn down. You're going to have to pay Isaiah Hardenstein. You're going to have to pick up Ivica Zubac's contract as a team option. So you can bring back the entirety of this core and see what happens, but is it worth it?
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a no-brainer. Yes. Like, who is the core piece that you're moving from this team? And
why? You can move Morris, maybe. I
don't consider him. See, that's where I guess we sort of diverge. Would be I'm looking at PG, Kawhi, Norman Powell, and that's like, probably Ivica Zubac needs to be there as well. And I just, everything points towards them running it back in some form, because they already extended Robert Covington.
And that's part of the reason I went this route, is because their offseason's basically already done. Like, they're going to make small moves here and there, but like, what is the big question, if not whether it's worth running it back, because their hands are essentially tied here.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have the mini mid-level to use, and I would anticipate them using that just based off how Steve Ballmer is spent. And this dovetails with my actual question for them, but what sort of happens with some of their own free agents? And Robert Covington's obviously removed from that, but Nicholas Batum as a player option, it feels like there's some quid pro quo there, because he re-signed at, they were able to re-sign him using non-bird rights last year, something I didn't anticipate being possible. And if he declines the player option, they now have his early bird rights, so they can pay him above the league average salary, which is quite substantial. At the same time, now that you have Robert Covington, now that you have Norman Powell, you have Terrence Mann, even Amir Coffey, who's a restricted free agent and was just quietly really good. For teams that are operating with sort of a beggar's dime, he would be someone to go after. You have him. Does that at all sort of change the calculus of how you're fleshing out your wing rotation? Also, Isaiah Hartenstein, great pickup by them. I still can't believe that he wasn't on a roster to start the year. Really good passer, solid rim protector. I don't want to say he has stretch to his game, but he can pop. And then he's also just, you don't look at him as this explosive finisher, but he can catch and finish above the rim. It's not these, highlight reel dunks, but he can do all of those things. And so I'm very curious to see how they prioritize some of their, maybe they bring all their own free agents back, but they're going to need their mini mid level, at least I would think, to keep Hartenstein at this point. And then are you going to pay Nick Batum? That would probably mean that Coffey's out the door. So one of those guys is probably gone. If all of them are back, I mean, good for the Clippers. But I'm also kind of wondering, I think it's overstated how much this team needs a floor general, but they could definitely use a connective passer or someone who could get them into their slower sets, just because right now you are so reliant on Reggie Jackson, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. And then you do have some secondary guys like a Luke Kennard off the dribble. Even Terrence Mann we saw. Norman Powell is going to give you rim pressure. But I'm talking about if you really need to slow it down and go through the motions, they don't really have anyone who's going to do that outside of Paul George and Kawhi. And I think you could argue that neither of those two is, again, those are very good, they could be 1A playmakers, but they're not. Yeah, there's just a difference between a floor general. And I'm not saying they need a Ricky Rubio, someone with that type of command over the game, but are they going to go out and try and find a player like that? And maybe Ricky Rubio can be picked up on a bargain because he's coming back from that ACL injury, just someone who could give you spot minutes in those situations or fill in the gaps when you have players missing games. And when it's Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, the latter specifically, there's going to be missed games there. And so I've thought, just based off the salaries that they have, could they be a team that sort of enters the running for a Mike Conley on the trade market? I know a lot of people think he's cooked. He was really good this past season. He's had some issues the past two postseasons. You slot him into the Clippers team, it's a whole different world compared to where he's in Utah. Or can they get someone, this entails using your mini mid level, and I don't know what that means for Hartenstein. Can you get a DeLon Wright? That feels a little too cheap for DeLon Wright, who was really good for Atlanta this year. But that's the type of things I'm thinking about. It feels like this team, I don't want to say needs like a triple or a home run, but maybe a double. It can't be a single, and it can't be it could be fully running it back and they might be the favorites, but you are still in a precarious situation should that happen. But what I'm laying out invariably probably comes at the expense of some of your own free agents, most notably Coffey and Hartenstein. If you let Hartenstein walk, I know bigs can be replaced on the cheap. The value he brought is just not something you're probably going to luck into a second time on a minimum contract.
And to your point about his stretchiness, I also think that gets a little bit overlooked. He went 19 of 34 on shots from 10 to 16 feet. Didn't take a single long two beyond 16 feet, but went 14 of 30 on three-pointers. So small sample sizes, but 55.9% on that longer mid-range, on that shorter mid-range zone, and then 46.7% from beyond the arc. Is it sustainable and scalable? Probably not, but there's something there.
And the thing with him too, and this is not just like me being with the benefit of hindsight here. I thought, and I think we had this conversation between the two of us already. I thought that he did enough when he was with Cleveland in the preceding season to warrant an NBA contract. And then he did a lot of the same things, just in more volume with the Clippers. And look, he's not the most mobile rim protector, but opponent shot 47.5% against him at the rim. That was the stingiest mark this year among 163 players to challenge at least 150 of those shots at the rim. And his assist rate among all centers who averaged at least 15 minutes or more per game, 19.3 assist rate. That ranks sixth at the position. That is
the man.
He's surrounded by good players, but you want your centers to be able to make those passes. And he's just, I think, the point that you really ended up making, whether you meant to or not, is he's just one of the more versatile role playing bigs that you're going to be able to find. And so losing him isn't nothing, especially with Zubac is in the final year of his contract now all of a sudden. And so it's like, what are you doing? I know you want to downsize a lot, but I think you still need one more big on this team, where if it's Zubac and Hartenstein, okay, you're set, done. You're fine. Because you could downsize when you want, play big when you want. But if you lose Hartenstein, or even if maybe some people think they should trade Zubac and keep Hartenstein, that's not really an option unless Hartenstein can come back for your mini mid-level or less. But like they will still need a big if one of those two is gone. So they do still have, I guess, a relatively boring offseason, but it could be fascinating to me, at least on the margins. Yeah,
on the margins for sure, but just fewer like big decisions to make than we see from a lot of teams heading into the offseason.
I'm not going to give Steve Ballmer a pat on the back for paying the tax this past season. They did cut their bill with the Serge Ibaka trade, but I like the fact that they took on money while planning ahead for this season with the Norman Powell trade and Robert Covington. And by the way, I've said this like 80 times in the podcast, Portland not getting a first round pick this year while giving up Nance, McCollum, Covington, and Norman Powell at the same deadline.
It's not great.
No, it's not great. They're not next up, though. Who is next up?
Next up is the other Los Angeles team. That would be the Lakers, who, yes, were a lottery team this season.
Can we just agree that we probably have the same question? I have a second one in my back pocket.
Is the question, what do you have to give up to move Russell Westbrook?
Right. Or what is the Russell Westbrook trade that's out
right.
there? And it's not even, I don't even care.
The way I actually phrased it was, are they actually willing to move Russell Westbrook?
Are they well, look, seems like they've been laying the breadcrumbs that maybe they're not going to do that. I'm sure you saw the report from the Athletic.
It feels like they're just trying to save face, right? Like, because it's going to be hard to move him without attaching a sweetener. $47.1 million for a player who looks like pretty washed.
And it's just, even if he's not, he's still very hard to fit into a larger ecosystem. We've seen it 3 times now, and maybe even 4 if you count some of those latter seasons in OKC. So I don't know what the move is out there. And I think
they give up like a 3,074 first round pick. That's their next available, right?
Yeah, roughly. And look, I get that people say there is value in the picks that they can give up, which if we're going to include swaps, which I would because they have so little, 26 and 28, they can swap. 27 and 29, they can actually trade. I get the idea that you're looking at this team now and thinking, 4 or 5 years down the line, imagine controlling their first round picks. I'm not saying that everything is always going to work out for the Lakers. They fell ass backwards into LeBron James by just ensuring they had cap space. And you need to give them credit for drafting the players they did, putting them in the position to, Anthony Davis wanted to go there, but
which players are we giving them credit for here?
I mean, look, Brandon Ingram, those are good players at Lonzo Ball that they drafted.
The Lakers have done a phenomenal job of drafting players who are only good when they leave the Lakers.
Well, but even I actually think that they've done a better job than advertised on Alex Caruso should be more of a success story.
I'm mostly being facetious here.
Right. And then even Austin Reeves is if you look at their players who are under contract for next season, forget the picks. It's Austin Reeves is their most attractive trade asset. You can say LeBron or AD, but if being realistic of players they would move, it's not Nunn. It's not Talon Horton-Tucker.
It's definitely not.
Stanley Johnson's a team option. And then there's fucking Austin Reeves.
Hey, don't overlook Wenyen Gabriel.
I'm going to. He's hustle incarnate.
I really like watching him, actually.
He was closing games for the Lakers by season's end. So
I'm not sure whether that says more about Wenyen Gabriel or the state of the Lakers.
Let's agree that it says both, because let's not dismiss what he does.
Fair.
And he had some really nice moments in New Orleans last season.
That's why I liked watching him so much.
But what I was saying, though, before I derailed us entirely, those picks in the distance, they're attractive in theory, but there's the risk that what happened with LeBron happens again with the Lakers this time around again. The other thing is also, what front office has the job security to say, we're going to take on this money, even if it's for a year, and we're also going to give up someone or someones that can help the Lakers. Maybe they're not super good. Maybe they're on less than desirable contracts, but they're still more valuable than Russell Westbrook on those deals. What front office has the job security to say, the only return, we're not going to see a return on this deal until 2026, 2027 at the earliest? What front office has that job security? Maybe OKC, anyone in San Antonio, sure, fine. Masai in Toronto.
Yeah.
Should we say Tim Connolly in Minnesota, or is that too soon?
Oof.
Too soon. Okay. So
by the time this releases, it might not be too soon, but since we're recording this a few hours after that news.
So yeah, I just don't think what the Lakers can do. And the most popular one has been floated, Brogdon, Hield for Westbrook and those Lakers picks. Okay, sure. But you're not getting anything imminent if you're Indiana. And
yeah, I don't even understand the incentive to give up anyone of value if you're the other team. Why would you move Brogdon there? What leverage do the Lakers have? You're giving us this awful contract and a pick way down the road that might not actually be this good. Let us give you this good player.
I think it's the only reason, and this isn't specific to the Pacers, is that Brogdon's extension kicks in next season. You don't want to pay the balance of it. Russ is done in one shot. Maybe you save a little money on top of the buyout. This season, it's over. Cap space does not mean the same to about 25 to 26 teams in the NBA as it does to the other 4 or 5. And that's why if it's the Knicks and they're looking to get off Randall, Fournier, there seems like there's framework there. The Knicks just don't think like that because they are just they're an archaic franchise. I'm sorry. They've had some hits in the draft. RJ Barrett is good. Your IQ takes remain terrible. Quentin Grimes is intriguing. like Deuce McBride, intriguing as well. And look, Alec Burks, nice find. I think people were too hard on him this season. But like the Knicks don't think like that. And so I don't know what the market is for him. And I also think because you're the Lakers, you can't view this as just addition by subtraction. Russell Westbrook is not getting you cap space. So if you're attaching first round picks to Russ and just getting nothing in value of return, you're now still tasked with fleshing out the rest of your roster on a beggar's dime, which I think is really the only other question here is how do they properly flesh out the roster here? Because as of right now, they're going to have, I'm going to say the mini mid-level, and that they're going to be too close to the apron to even use the biannual. So you have the mini mid-level, 6.4 million, and then the rest of your roster on minimums. You need to hit on all of those, like most of those signings, and you need to hit on your mini mid-level this year because you whiffed on it last year with Kendrick Nunn. And looming over all this, by the way, Malik Monk, you don't have his bird rights. And so if he wants to come back for the mini mid-level, fine. He was valuable. He's probably worth it. Your mini mid-level is gone. Gone. If he signs for less than the mini mid-level, I want an investigation lodged into what was going on there. That feels like super quid pro quo, even more egregious than the Nick Batum instance, just because he is so young, passed up a chance to probably make a little bit more elsewhere. Neither here nor there on that. But I'm just curious to see what they do. Is there still is there an appeal to taking a little bit less with the Lakers or to contend? Because can you even guarantee you're contending?
No, absolutely not. I don't understand what the motivation is going to be for the veterans this time around. Like last offseason, they could at least operate under the guise that this is going to be a competitive roster. It's not. It's just not. Like if you want to play with LeBron and 40 games of Anthony Davis, awesome.
Right. And look, the thing that might help them, because I don't want to, it is still LA. It is still LeBron and AD. Because so much of the league is working with less than like even the full mid-level exception of flexibility, when the money's equal, I do think compared to most organizations, and I'm be honest here, I love Toronto, fantastic franchise. If Toronto and LA are offering the same or comparable money,
right,
LA is going to win that battle. And so that will help them. But they need to, the front office needs to hit on these signings. And novel concept, and I know you agree, I think they should probably target shooting and defense in complementary capacities around LeBron and AD.
What was that?
Shooting and defense. Complementary shooting.
You said what in defense?
Ball dominant playmaking, non-shooters who play on one side of the floor. And
okay, cool. That's what I thought. Because we're still on the Lakers, right? We haven't moved on to the Thunder.
We probably should. I think that's the final thought. It's just like sign a bunch of old guys who need the ball, are going to be in outside roles, play one side of the floor. That makes sense.
Cool. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Let's move on to the next team.
Oklahoma City Thunder. I feel like this question could just be copied and pasted into every offseason for the foreseeable future, because is this the offseason they move the timetable up? The Thunder have 35 total draft picks through 2028. And last I checked, there are not 38 roster spots on an NBA team. So there are consolidation moves coming. They have set themselves up fantastically to make that big move for whichever star becomes available. Is it going to be Bradley Beal? Is it going to be someone new, someone we haven't even fathomed is going to be available this offseason? But someone, because it happens every year, is going to become unexpectedly available. What if it's Zion Williamson? What if it's Julius Randle because he decides he wants to be a star again? Whoever it is this the time that the Thunder decide, hey, let's actually go win some games now? We have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, we have Josh Giddey, we have a bunch of intriguing pieces around them. Let's cash in some of the chips and still have more chips than anyone else at the table.
So I think that's a fair question. I feel like we're too soon on it, and I also feel like they're not going to do it. Mostly because Sam Presti came out and said that that's not how they're going to operate. And I know he could be lying, but
they're going to get more picks.
But
100%. They're going to have 45 draft picks through 2029 by the end of the offseason.
And is it going to be a situation where, so they have number 12 in addition to number 2 in this draft? Are they drafting and stashing at number 12? Or we've seen them do this before. Are they trading that pick for another pick down the road? We've seen them do it before. So that's a fantastic question. And look, even this summer, the body count is up there. I say body count like people are dying. That's a terrible phrasing. I apologize. The roster count is up there already. Derek Favors already opted in. I know Mike Muscala has a team option, but he was pretty good for them And so you pick up that $3.5 million option, I would say. You're guaranteeing Kenrich Williams' contract. Lou Dort's team option is getting picked up. You're guaranteeing Aaron Wiggins' deal. And so, like, there are maybe one or two players, Teo Maladon, or like, you're still, and you have two picks in the first, is it two or three? The two picks in the first round of
I think it's like
draft.
7, right?
Yeah. So, like, you're going to get to 15 bodies pretty quickly. When you're yes, you can carry more in training camp, yada, two-way deals, yada, yada, yada. But you're going to get to the roster max pretty quickly. There's going to have to be some smaller scale consolidation here. And I thought it was interesting. It doesn't matter anymore because they're going to wind up with one of those 3 bigs in the draft. I thought it was interesting that Woj linked them to DeAndre Ayton because they don't even have cap space this summer. Just they have that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's extension kicking in, and you have Kemba's dead money on the books. So, like, are they the team that I don't think they would do this, but like, are you just going to start are they just going to waive Derek Favors to create a roster spot and deal with that $10+ million in dead money? Maybe they waive and stretch him. Like, I don't know, but I'm with you that they need to figure that out. My question for them initially, when I thought we were going to do this before the lottery, was how are they going to fill like the big man spot? Because I think SGA and Josh Giddey need, I don't want to say a true big, but like someone other than Mike Muscala who, he doesn't need to pop off screens, but like a rim roller. And Jeremiah Robinson Earl was good this year, but I don't want him having a monopoly on the center minutes. They're going to get that now. My other question would just be, I think it's just in line with yours, is what moves are they going to make independent of the draft? And are they going to trade for someone? Are they going to facilitate a trade where maybe, look, we talk about Russell Westbrook. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for them to get in on that as part of be the third team. I just don't know what money you give up. So that's a really bad example. But are you going to they don't have the money matching to go out, but are you going to try and consolidate a different way where it's these smaller scale moves this year? Do we see them explore? And this is what I'm getting at. It might be a spicy take. Are you exploring the market for a Darius Baisley? Are you exploring the market for even a Lou Dort at this point? Because he's headed into the contract year. And I know this is a callous way to think about it. Are you paying him long term? I think the only person I'm prepared to say is a tentpole cornerstone is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And I don't mean an offense to Josh Giddey for that. His sub 50 true shooting percentage concerns me. He's a fantastic passer, solid defender at his position, good size, solid rebounder. I don't see the long-term vision with him in SGA. I really don't. And maybe it just naturally unfolds to where if you're surrounding them with complementary star types or blue chip building blocks, like one of these big men that are coming out of the draft, that there's some organic fit there with some extra staggering. I'm just only prepared. I would be more prepared to say whoever they draft plus SGA are the tentpole prospects. Is everybody else on the table? I don't think it's going to be the consolidation for a star, but I am interested to see what other transaction or moves they're going to make here on the margins to free up spots or even playing time for some of these incoming players that some we don't even know. Forget the 2 first-round picks that they have. Like they're going to make other moves on the margins. That's what they do.
Well, if it only takes Precious Achiuwa and OG Anunoby to get Zion Williamson.
I'm glad you saw that. The YouTube comments for Hardwood Knocks are always an adventure. Go follow us on YouTube, subscribe. But yeah, I think OKC, and look, if they wanted to go up, like you said, they're an interesting sign and trade destination.
I agree with you, though, that this isn't the offseason. It doesn't feel right from a roster timing standpoint or from a player availability standpoint.
All they need to do is keep Poku and play him 40 minutes a game, and they'll be fine. He's the other blue chip cornerstone, if I wasn't clear on that. I actually think that Poku is going to be absurdly good. Besides the point, who's our next team?
Next up, we have the Portland Trailblazers, or at least what is left of them. My question here is just, is a quick turnaround feasible? Because they've made their intentions quite clear that they're trying to do one of the simultaneous teardown scale ups, except they've messed up at like every step of the process. So they have a bunch of flexibility to do what exactly. This year's free agent class is actively awful. They aren't set up to add much of anything in the draft. So we're ultimately left looking at like a 5-man group of Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons, assuming he's re-signed, Yusuf Nurkic, assuming he's re-signed, Josh Hart, and Nasir Little. Yay. Like, is that enough to make any noise in the West?
It feels like even their best case outcome of the offseason is going to be more of a lateral move, if not still a regression. And look, my question's kind of similar in that what are they doing with the number 7 pick? And it's more so, who are they trading it for? And if you're not trading that pick at all, is Dame actually on board with this rebuild? He looked pretty crestfallen when they fell to number 7 in the lottery. And look, I'm going to be honest right now. I know Pistons fans think that they're getting the number 7 pick for Jeremy Grant. If the Blazers do that, that is going to be a significantly damaging move to their future. Jeremy Grant's a very good player, not super old. You're mortgaging a huge, I don't even know what the other moving parts of that deal would be, but it would be a basketball catastrophe if that's what you're turning the 7th pick into. And I know that these draft picks are more like ambiguous appeal than anything. It's the allure of who it could turn into, and then all of a sudden they'll draft someone and it won't be as valuable. Is it Shaedon Sharpe? Is it Keegan Murray? Whoever. At the same time, like, it's at least a viable younger like prospect around whom you can potentially build. To punt on that flyer for Jeremy Grant,
even in a bad draft class.
And right, and I don't even think this draft class. I'm only like a little bit higher than Shin Deep. I said this on the previous podcast into draft prep. I'm like kind of not like I'm in on this draft class, not as much as last year's.
I think we see a lot of role players, which is valuable. I just don't know that you get like building blocks.
Well, here's the thing. Jeremy Grant is closer to role player than star, and you're going to give him the 4-year 112.
Oh, I'm on board with you. I'm giving the caveat that this is all true, even with this being a weak draft class.
I was going to throw to you to ask, what do you think of the idea? And this is just operating on the assumption that, because look, you have Damian Lillard, who is age 32, correct? You have to move this pick if you want. Like, there's no, Dame's going to be in this for another 2 or 3 years and then we'll be good. No. That's not how this is going to work. Would you move? Other moving parts involved. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say, and you made this great point, they have this flexibility. It's basically all conditional because their cap space is sub-max. If they really want to, get rid of everything they need to inflate that number as high as possible, they're probably looking at, I don't know, like almost, let's say 24 million in space. You can then dump salaries to get to like a max for DeAndre Ayton if you want to go the sign and trade route, and figure that base year compensation out with Phoenix. At the same time, you're punting on the Jeremy Grant trade exception that you have. And so, like, I call it the Jeremy Grant trade exception because it's perfectly sized for Jeremy Grant. But like, you're not having both here. You have to operate basically as an over-the-cap team if you want to keep that trade exception. So their flexibility is very conditional, where it's like you can't have it all for them. I wanted to throw to you, would you give up the number 7 pick in a deal that got you Rudy Gobert or a deal that gets you Brogdon and Miles Turner?
I probably would in either of those instances, partially just because I am lower on this draft class, but also because, selfishly, I want to see Dame stay in a Portland Trailblazers uniform. He's one of those players that feels so attached to a city. And, player autonomy is great and fully promote that. But also, like, I love the idea of these legitimate superstars staying in one jersey forever. And if there's a chance for that to happen because there's an immediate move of that caliber, we're talking about something way better than Jeremy Grant with either of those situations. With Rudy Gobert, all of a sudden, you have a great rim rolling threat who completely transforms what Portland can do on defense. And the same is true with the Indiana Pacers move, just albeit on a lower scale with Turner, who also gives you some pop, and you're picking up Brogdon in that deal, who is very much a jack of all trades, can fit alongside Dame. So in either instance, I think the reward is worth the risk.
I would be curious what the Rudy Gobert deal needs to look like because with Utah, if you're giving up Gobert, you're not getting better, but I also don't know that you're trying to rebuild. And
I'm just still assuming that Gobert's in Charlotte already.
You're going to make a lot of people in Atlanta mad with that comment. So I think I'm with you too. I would do both instances. I'm a little bit more iffier on the Pacers one because I don't love the Brogdon extension anymore, but you can pair him with Simons and Dame, and that's fine. Yeah. And then you have Josh Hart there, presumably still, but Turner's coming up on his next contract. And then is Nurk all of a sudden just you're letting him walk for nothing, I guess, in either of those scenarios? Or are you keeping Turner and Nurk because they're a sign and trade for Nurk? My bonus question really quickly was, do you think Anthony Simons is getting max or near max money in restricted free agency?
I don't think so. I think it's a tier or two short.
I'm just wondering if the Pistons falling to 5 hurts this theory. I actually wonder if they become a DeAndre Ayton suitor now because they missed out on all those bigs. I thought they might have been a team. Just him next to Cunningham would have been super interesting. I will say I'm kind of with you in the sense that there's just not enough money out there. And so unless it's going to be Detroit, Indiana, Orlando, or San Antonio, I don't know which of those teams. Detroit might, but if they're going to draft Jaden Ivey, they shouldn't. They don't have the incentive. I really don't think Simons is like Simons and DeJounte Murray would be like a really intriguing backcourt.
That'd be fun.
They kind of have like this overstock of swingmen / wings already with Vassell. Josh Primo is there. Trey Jones emerged. So, and they just don't, that's not San Antonio's game. But let's go max out or near max out this other team's free agent, unless he's LaMarcus Aldridge, apparently. So, and Orlando just has so much of everything.
Such a glut everywhere.
Right. And a lot of it is guard. So to go after Simons would be a little bit weird. But it wouldn't surprise me if he just signs a deal with, like, let's set the over-under on his salary. His max could be 30.5. I'm going to say 22 million.
I was coming in around 24.
So over.
So a little over. Unless he decides to go to the Lakers on the mid-level.
Go the Malik Monk route, but make a little bit more money than Malik Monk did.
Right. Exactly.
Who's our next team?
Next up, we have the Sacramento Kings, and I'm going to go the easy route here and just ask, where is Richaun Holmes going to be traded to? Because he is on the books for $11.2 million next year. His contract runs through 2024-25 with a player option for that final year. It's pretty clear that they're committed to Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, which worked better than I expected at the tail end of this past season. It looks like there is legitimately something to build around there. As they gain more comfort, Holmes is only going to be phased out of a primary spot within the rotation even more. Harrison Barnes is still there to absorb a lot of the minutes at the 4. He can play some small ball 5 when Sabonis isn't on the floor. So Holmes needs a different home. I think that's pretty clear. We thought that he was going to be commanding a lot more money last offseason. Charlotte was easily our favorite destination. Are they still in play? Are other teams going to get in the mix? Because Holmes is still a legitimately good, impactful player, even if he's not Domantas Sabonis.
Also, really quickly, because we haven't addressed it on the podcast, and I feel we were not saying the off-court stuff with his, I think it's his girlfriend and his son. I just feel, whatever the truth is there, I feel terrible for his son. It seems like he's been through a lot. So hopefully his son's okay. And everything we're saying about Richaun Holmes has only everything to do about what's going on basketball-wise. Just wanted to throw that caveat out there. I think I'm with you in the sense Charlotte, Dallas would be a really good fit for him, and Toronto are teams that I could see going after him. And maybe it doesn't take, the Kings have kind of hurt his trade value. His contract is still so good, but by having Sabonis, you've made him superfluous, and our team's going to lowball you there. This falls under the umbrella of my question. What the fuck are the Kings going to do? Was my actual question. And I think anyone who listens to this podcast,
that's just like a state of being for the Kings.
They are in a perpetual state of existential crisis. That is the Sacramento Kings. We do not typically gobble the low-hanging fruit with the Kings on this podcast. I want to make that clear. Everyone binge eat away at the low-hanging fruit. They deserve it at this point. And I don't know what they do here. They've tethered themselves to this weird timeline, and it's just hysterical that they landed in the number 4 spot, which that's a huge asset. Jaden Ivey with De'Aaron Fox and Davion Mitchell, I'm not a big proponent of drafting for fit. I would go best player available, so I would take Jaden Ivey and I wouldn't think twice about it. But like the Kings have tied themselves to this more urgent timeline to where, well, you have to care a little bit because what happens there? And that's not the cleanest fit with Fox and Sabonis.
And so Ivey's going to be a developmental project anyway.
And so, I mean, in theory, you could say, oh, well, then we'll get to bring him along slowly because Fox and Sabonis are there. That's not how the Kings are going to operate. It's also, what are you grooming him for to take De'Aaron Fox's job? It's like De'Aaron Fox is not 35 years old. I'm just curious, and I know we said we didn't want to talk about the draft, but are they going to is this a trade down scenario for them? Or are they, and this would have been fair game regardless, do they try and use that pick to materially upgrade, I would say, the wing rotation? And the issue there, and I scoured like the potential wing market, I don't even know what prospective deals are going to be worth giving up what would be the number 4 pick. So it feels like they're going to be in a situation of, they're probably better off trading down. I saw some people float like John Collins for the number 4 pick. I don't know if John Collins is worth that in a vacuum. He's not worth that to the Kings. You just traded for Sabonis. And you're not, Miles Turner, you're not going to go after him after you just traded for Sabonis. He's also
that would be amazing, though.
That would
Can you imagine?
It would potentially be the most Kings move ever, though.
It would be.
I've seen people mention, could they be a sneaky Rudy Gobert destination? That is, you free Sabonis from playing with another big, only to play him beside another big who's an even worse offensive fit next to him. So no, you don't do that. And he clearly doesn't fall under the wing umbrella there. So I don't know. There are other moves they can make. They shouldn't be a cap space team unless they dump other salary. What is their mid-level exception get them? What are they going to do with their draft picks? It does feel like there's going to be a significant trade here and that it's going to be a buy. I don't see them wanting to move Richaun Holmes strictly to get spare parts or future assets. That's not the timeline on which they're operating. And so my question was, what the fuck are they going to do? Because I'm honestly just at a loss there's all these different options available to them, but none of them seem to coalesce into whatever the hazy bigger picture they've assembled here is. And that number 4 pick, it feels like the draft is going to start with them. Like they are the first wild card. And it's
a 3-player top tier. So of course the Kings have the number 4 pick, but even if they had, I don't even know if I want to go there. That's just too mean to the Kings. I think you know where I was going.
I think I do, which is why I'll carry us right along. It's just like, I'm at a loss. Don't know really what, and I'm even stumbling through it now because of the lead in the thing that you just teased. I'm just like, do they even have are they the team that's just going to keep the pick and then not draft who the obvious player at number 4 feels like he is? Because they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt if they go with Shaedon Sharpe at number 4. They're not going to be the team that gets the benefit of the doubt there.
Right. Just put it in the bag. Bag.
So I just don't even know. It feels like the more prudent move would be to explore the trade down scenarios just because it doesn't look like the market for what they need is. A name that I floated just because I don't want to say his fit, but his future is a little bit more murky in Toronto is OG Anunoby. Just with the emergence of Scotty Barnes, we sort of saw our OG stagnate on offense. I think in part because of the roster construction. Mm-hmm. Is there something there? Richaun Holmes at number 4 for OG? Is that too much? Does Toronto say, whoa, so we're going to get number 4 and supposed to draft someone who stands under 6'7"? I don't know. But I can't come up with a deal that makes sense for the number 4 pick. That's for an actual player. There are a bunch of different trade down scenarios that you could look at for sure.
Yeah, I would rather them try to trade down to get more picks. Just let's take some more flyers in this class, because even if it's weak at the top, there should be a lot of rotation players throughout the back half of the first round, the top half of the second round.
Yeah, I could would they do something? I feel like this maybe isn't the Spurs. If the Spurs offered number 9, and people are going to laugh because he's become a meme, but Josh Richardson and then something else, because Josh Richardson was really good for them and was having a solid season before he was traded from Boston anyway. But maybe that's a team that could look at doing it. I know that Charlotte has 2 firsts, but who are they giving the Kings? That's right. Where it gets weird. Is even when you look at the teams that I could see maybe wanting to trade up to number 4, can the Pacers actually do anything for you? I'm sure they're just pissed that they didn't end up in the top 4 here. Brogdon and what? Brogdon and 6, and I think you would need something else there too. I'm not even going to lie. So
I don't think you would.
You don't? I don't. No. Brogdon's not this team needs a wing and
Yeah, but I'm not sure that moving down from 4 to 6 matters that much in this class.
Well, then fair enough. But then if you're the Kings, I guess I don't know. Like I said, I don't see the options there, even when you get into the trade down stuff with teams that have interest. So Sacramento's offseason, it's always chaotically fascinating, detrimentally fascinating. I think on more of a higher level here, a deeper level, it's just fascinating for so many reasons because of what it's going to say about their philosophy, their timeline, and then, of course, the other players that are currently on this roster, what it says about them.
Last but not least, we have the San Antonio Spurs. And my question here, is there a building block in San Antonio other than DeJounte Murray? Ton of intriguing players. Keldon Johnson, the energy that he brings crashing to the rim and serving as a secondary scorer, really impressive. Jakob Poeltl, good defensive anchor. I think they should bring back Lonnie Walker. Devin Vassell showed that there was more juice to his game, especially in the second half of the season. You still have Josh Primo. Trey Jones emerged towards the back half of the schedule. Are any of them like building blocks? Because if they're not, that's an awful lot of good, not great players when there should be a little bit more urgency around a version of DeJounte Murray that hit like full-fledged stardom this last season.
I am with you there. And it's probably an oversimplification to say DeJounte Murray can't be the best player on a championship team. There are like 10 players who maybe 10 that fit that bill. And so what the Spurs, I think, are tasked with are kind of finding DeJounte Murray's equal or someone who perhaps makes him the 1B. And so you're asking, is anyone on the roster going to come close to that?
Think so.
I think Vassell would have the best chance, and he would have to take sort of the Kawhi Leonard route of his offense really coming. We saw him get more ball screens after the trade deadline, but I don't know. And you could even argue just because he's more mystery box, like is Josh Primo have a better chance of being that player? All of which might be to say they don't have that player on the roster right now. And as much as it's the Spurs, I don't think you bank on them getting it at number 9. And that's just
probably not.
How do you build out from here? Because you could argue that they are a consolidation candidate. And we've seen, look, they've been a little bit more willing to make moves. The DeMar DeRozan sign and trade. They flipped Derek White at the deadline. They would be and I know DeJounte Murray tweeted this out, a Photoshop picture of Zach LaVine in his Spurs jersey and then deleted it. Respect to him for tweeting that out, though. They are a fun Zach LaVine team for me. I think you could argue they might need defense a little bit more, but they also don't have the level of shot maker that Zach LaVine is. And I'm talking about someone who's also flying around off the ball as well, because he's become like the quintessential dual threat, whereas he will hit these tough jumpers. And it's not even a dual. He's an every level scorer, basically, but it scales to both on the ball and off the ball. And they have a bunch of players who I think can score fine on the ball, can score fine off the ball. They don't have someone who can score on ball like Zach LaVine. And
completely agree. And I think for the same reason, Bradley Beal, this is a sneaky fun landing spot for him.
I would agree, but do you think, I guess you wouldn't care about going for quote unquote age when Zach LaVine's not that much younger than Bradley Beal, and DeJounte Murray's not exactly young anymore either. What you get into the issue of is that Zach LaVine has to want to leave. It feels like it would almost be easier to get Bradley Beal as much as he's come out and said he wants to be in Washington than LaVine, because the Bulls have sort of married themselves to wanting to win now. And so Zach LaVine has to really want out of Chicago, where I think there's a better chance. Doesn't mean it's likely that Washington could say, it's really time for us to go in a different direction, because we have the number 10 pick. What are we supposed to do with that to build around you? And so that would be a super fun destination. My question, which I guess could fall under this umbrella as well, how do they use their cap space, which can, I think there's a chance that they end up having the most cap space in the NBA. They can get up to, if they really want to maximize it, like almost 30 million at this point. There's Orlando and Detroit and even Indy have the potential to get more, but they have to take additional steps to get there. They are the team, just based off like the extra step or that they would need to take to get like the actual max. If they decided to get rid of Zach Collins, or is this just, can we find a destination for Romeo Langford, move his money? Are they a team that would go after one of these RFAs? And I'm saying Miles Bridges or DeAndre Ayton. And I'd probably say no. Like, I don't think that they're going to like take a huge swing in free agency, and that would pertain to Zach LaVine and Bradley Beal as well, even if sign and trade possibilities are on the table.
Yeah. I struggle to see any of those restricted free agents really working out for this team. And once you move past that level, Miles Bridges, are you going to throw a ton of money at him? And like,
Charlotte probably really matches, right? They're
I would think so. Yeah. And even if they did, I don't know that it really like elevates you as much as you need. What if Kyrie Irving or James Harden turn down their deals and look for new contracts? Feasibly, Irving is a good fit alongside Murray. I don't know what to make of Harden at this stage. Do you want to even deal with the headaches? Probably not. I can't imagine a rigid, disciplined system like San Antonio going after Kyrie Irving right now. But like the options are just so limited. This feels like one of those off seasons where like, congrats on having your cap space. Good luck using it next year.
I do wonder if they could inflate the market on shorter term deals for some of like the the second or third tier free agents. Like, could they be if they want Tyus Jones, or if you're looking at guys like Gary Harris who rebooted his value, or Victor Oladipo rebooted his value, or
I guess you could throw a ton at like Colin Sexton.
I don't know. I guess I don't mind his fit here, but they just feel so guard heavy. Where it's like, if it's Zach LaVine,
and then like, why are you bringing back Lonnie Walker?
Right, and so this would lead to the question of, if you're not, and it's fair to say that they're not, just because the options to, and we could talk about a consolidation trade. The question, who?
Right.
It's just
Jeremy Grant.
I feel like I am normally pretty good at spotting, even if it's not the obvious star or high-end player that could want out next. And I just look up and down the NBA right now, and I'm like, I just don't see that guy. Maybe I'm too high on like every team or the situation that they're in. I just don't know who that surprise smack you in the face player is going to be. So what does leaning further into this rebuild? Because right now I call it a build. I wouldn't even call it a rebuild.
Right.
Another question would be, what does leaning further into it, if they want to do it, look like? Because like, if you're trading Jakob Poeltl and Josh Richardson, I think Jakob Poeltl makes you substantially worse. But I do get to the question of like, well, why are you moving Jakob Poeltl? He's so cheap, and maybe he makes a lot in his next contract, but maybe he doesn't. He's not a player that I think you cry over should he leave for a ton more money. And the only way to actually lean further into it, and I don't think you do, and I'll make that clear, is, do you make DeJounte Murray available? Is he the player that we haven't given enough thought to? I just don't see them doing that to Pop, or even to him, because of how much they value the homegrown talent. They are maybe the toughest team to peg for the offseason. Just to look at, well, what are they? I know we just had what the fuck are the Kings going to do? The Spurs are in a similar boat, albeit I would say, is it even a more enviable boat? I would say
maybe. I think this is the byproduct of trying to skirt two eras. Like, you end up in this treadmill of slightly above mediocrity, where you're too good to get the high end prospects, but you're not good enough to really compete. And it's really tough to escape that.
And I think the Spurs maybe were undervaluing some of the developmental projects on their roster, or maybe their ability to mine talent at a spot like number 9 in this draft. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's fair to start asking those questions. They're like in a pleasant mediocrity right now, because they finally moved on from the post Kawhi era where they had DeRozan. It felt like they were even more trapped. So they're not stuck. I might argue the Kings are more stuck because of what they're going to have to do with Sabonis, his next contract, what they owe Fox.
I think I would disagree, just because Sabonis and Fox give you higher upside than Murray alone does.
I mean, that's probably fair. But the Spurs just, wouldn't you, the Spurs are built better to make the consolidation trade if an opportunity arises in Sacramento right now.
Yes, absolutely. But I think there's a scenario in which Sacramento just breaks out. If Sabonis and Fox totally click, if Davion Mitchell explodes as a sophomore, Harrison Barnes is still there, you have some depth across the board. I don't think it's too far-fetched that they actually make some postseason noise.
Wow.
Unlikely. But I mean, if you're looking at like the distribution of outcomes, San Antonio probably has a higher median outcome, but it tails off a little quicker. I think Sacramento's like true peak rises a little bit higher than San Antonio's does right now. It's just unlikelier that it gets there.
I'm going to throw very couple quick scenarios at you. If these opportunities arise, are the Spurs a good destination for these players? What if the Jazz, or he asks for out, what if Donovan Mitchell becomes available? The idea of a Murray-Donovan Mitchell backcourt.
I don't really love that one, just because Mitchell has become such a black hole on defense where just there's nothing there.
What about Damian Lillard?
If you can get him, go do it. I'd say that about any team.
I want to make it clear. I think this is a situation in Portland where they're going to continue onward until Dame says stop. And he hasn't said stop. But just if he becomes available, I know he's older, but like, I wouldn't mind the Spurs if you're keeping Murray as part of that.
Let's see what Pop can do with Dame.
We both already said yes to Zach LaVine and Bradley Beal. I guess that would mean, and look, that's like where I'm at with. I thought about, what if things
Jeremy Grant.
It's like, why are you calling Jeremy Grant a star right now?
I don't know.
The final one would be just, and I don't think you do it, But like, what if Phoenix is just like everything's gone to shit and they're like, okay, Chris Paul is like, we're going to move on from Chris Paul. He's great on the teammates. If you can get him without giving up like material value, I would love him in San Antonio as well. But you'd prefer Devin Booker if things are going to go upside down in Phoenix. Suns fans, want to make it clear, I don't think it's getting to that point.
Nor do I.
That will wrap us up. We did all 7 teams. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to us if you haven't done so already. First-time listeners, consider throwing us that permanent subscription. We think that you'll enjoy the content that we continue to put out. Follow us on the socials. The links and handles to which are in the podcast description. Follow us on YouTube, youtube.com. Search Hardwood Knocks will come up. We do post organic content on YouTube, IG, and TikTok right now. So there are reasons to follow us there. And join our Discord where we have tons of fun. The link to that is in the podcast description as well. Until next time, leave with the shout out to the one, the only, the best of the best conference finals X Factors in Frank Ntilikina.